Well, thanks for tuning in. So let's dive right in and have a look at some of the things you want to think about before you purchase your trail camera. Now, for me, one of the most important considerations I look at is whether the camera is a no-glow camera or a low-glow camera. The difference is basically in the wavelength of the IR. Now, there is, I guess you could say, a little bit of debate as to whether the no-glow cameras are actually invisible to the animals. I'm not 100% convinced that it is, but I certainly think it's better than the low-glow camera. Boy, that's a mouthful. But the bottom line is I typically buy no-glow cameras, but with the understanding that they may still not be totally invisible to the animals out there. Next up, let's talk about sensor size for a minute. Basically, you have two choices. Well, maybe three. You have HD, which is 1080. You have 2.7K, and then, of course, you have 4K. Now, if you're just going to use the footage to see maybe what's in your backyard, then you're probably going to be fine with an HD camera. If, on the other hand, you're going to post your footage on social media, for example, maybe here on YouTube, I would suggest that you look at getting a 4K sensor just because it gives you a little bit of latitude with regards to cropping. Now, the other thing to note is that not all 4K sensors are equal, as I'm sure you can imagine. I usually look for a trail camera that has a Sony IMX458 sensor in it because I've had good results with those. Now, here's something else that's really quite important. When you buy a 4K camera, make absolutely sure that the frame rate is at least 24 frames a second. It's more likely it's going to be 30 frames a second. But in the past, I've ordered a camera that said, yep, it's 4K video. And then when I got it, well, surprise, surprise, it was 10 frames a second. 10 frames a second is definitely not enough for video. Another important factor to look at is the trigger speed of the camera. Trigger speed is simply the amount of time it takes for the camera to start recording after motion has been detected. Most of the cameras I buy have a trigger speed of 0.1 second. So I would say between 0.1 second to 0.2 second, that's what you want to be looking at. You'll also need to check what the interval is between your recordings. I've set my cameras to the fastest possible, and that's about 5 seconds. So it takes about 5 seconds from the end of one video before the next video can start. Now, the reason I do that is, well, quite frankly, I don't want to miss anything. And memory cards are so cheap that you can buy large capacity cards for a fairly reasonable cost. And speaking of memory cards, most of the cameras you get are going to take an SD card. What I do is I actually buy micro SD cards with an adapter. And the reason why I do that is because I can take a micro SD card and put it into my action camera or even put it into my drone. So it just adds a little bit of flexibility in that regard. Audio is another really important feature you want your trail camera to have. It really helps to bring your footage alive. So imagine you're watching the playback and you can hear a salmon in the water splashing around perhaps, or maybe it's an animal walking on crunchy snow, or maybe it's a bear that comes up and sniffs your camera. But the audio really takes your video to that next level, so make sure your trail camera can record audio. Well, let's talk price, because for the vast majority of us, this is a very, very important feature. And I often get asked, whether the more expensive cameras are worth it, the cameras that cost a couple $100. And, well, I have to be honest, I have a really hard time answering that question. I use cameras that cost somewhere around $90 to $100 US or so, and I've had really good results with those. Now, I've also had a couple of them that have malfunctioned. For example, the infrared filter on one failed at a pretty inopportune time with coastal wolves, and I wasn't overly happy with that. Now, that can probably happen with a more expensive camera as well. I think the answer lies in where your budget is. I'm not so sure that the video quality you're going to get is worth 2 to 3 times the cost. In other words, is the video quality 2 to 3 times as good as what you get on the cheaper camera? But there may be other features that make it worth it. So I think it's much more of a personal decision than a sort of a binary decision, if you will. For me, I'd rather have a few more cameras by paying less. But if you maybe just need one camera for your backyard or for some property you have, then maybe you want to spend the additional money. Another consideration is, if you're putting these cameras out in nature, is theft. Now, fortunately, I've not had any of my cameras stolen, although I've certainly had people wave to me on the cameras, but so far none of them have been stolen. But cost has to be factored into the probability of that as well. And I'm just going to quickly touch on a few other things. For example, should you get a camera that is cell network enabled? Well, for me, no, because my cameras are out where there is no cell signal, so there's no point in having that. But if your camera is out, in your backyard or somewhere close to home, maybe that's a feature you want to have. Also, some of the cameras have a Bluetooth feature. I don't worry about that too much, simply because when I go to check my cameras, I usually just swap out the card, check the batteries, and make sure everything is functioning. But maybe that's a feature you wish to have as well. You may also be wondering if you should get a camera with a little solar cell on top of it. And unfortunately, I can't tell you that. I just recently acquired one of those, but I haven't been able to put it to the test just yet. And I just want to tell you how I have my camera set up. Now, this isn't a right versus wrong. This is simply what works for me. The video length I have set to 35 seconds. The interval between videos is at the lowest setting at around 5 seconds. And as I mentioned before, memory cards are fairly cheap, and you can get them in large capacity. So I'm not too worried about having too many files. I'd rather have too many files than too few files. Another little caveat I'll just mention is be very careful how you place your camera. So for example, if you have a fern in front of it and it becomes windy, well, that fern could trigger your camera and you'll end up with 200 files of a moving fern, which isn't so exciting. And I only mention this to you because, well, yeah, I've done it. So don't do that. Well, thanks for watching the video, and I hope some of the things I discussed in here will help make your decision making a little bit easier when it comes to choosing a trail camera. Without a doubt, I've forgotten to mention some things. So if you're watching this video and you can think of some of those things, please put them down in the comments. Or if you have suggestions for the buyers out there that I didn't mention, please feel free to add that as well. So with that, I'll say thanks for watching. I would highly appreciate it if you would give the video a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe as well. And if you are a subscriber to my humble channel, I thank you very much for that. See you next time.